For the very first time in the Josh Allen era, the Buffalo Bills have lost consecutive games going into the bye week. There's tons of panic out there and just as many reasons being proposed. But I'm going to tell you why it's happening today on the Ralph Rant. Let's go.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant, your source for hard-hitting Buffalo Bills takes. Now, here's your host of the Ralph Rant, that veteran watcher of generations of Bills teams, the prophet who predicted Josh Allen's greatness, that opinionated so-and-so you've walked out on parties because of, the Ralph.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant. I am your host, the Ralph. Thank you ever so much for being here. On today's show, we are talking about the seeming disaster that has befallen the Buffalo Bills, having lost consecutive games going into the bye week, something that has never occurred in the Josh Allen era, even during his rookie season when the Bills put up the last losing record they've had in quite a number of years. Now, before I get into it, I'm going to go ahead and ask that you like this video and hit subscribe. We're trying to get to 1,000 subs by the end of the season, and I will continue to deliver you the type of therapy that I'm going to do today for both myself and for all of you watching, because I've got a different take on what's going on. And how I'm going to explain my position today, we'll go through and talk about these maximum bye week blues that we are suffering, that we have not seen this again in the current era that we're in, and talk about how this season maybe compares to other seasons and how the Bills actually have gotten here in this particular season, going 4-0 and then losing the 2 in a row. Then we're going to talk about some of what people are calling the causes for these issues with the Bills. And if we had to list those, the first one I'm going to talk about is the offensive offense that we've been seeing from Buffalo. And then I'll move on to what I'm calling indefensible defense, because there's problems there, but I think those take a backseat to the problems with the offense. And then we're going to talk about how symptoms are not causes. And I'll get into some comparisons and analogies there, because this aims at what I'm trying to explain to you about the Bills today. And then finally, we're going to talk about attitude and the attitude of leadership, because I think that gets to the core of the issue. And I have to show you a quick movie clip here before we jump into these, which came to mind to me earlier this week, and I want to lay that on you, and then we'll go ahead and jump in to our subjects here. So let's listen to that, and then we're going to blow the horn and go.
You want to know why this outfit got the hell kicked out of it? Blind man could see it in a minute.
All right, let's jump into precisely why we feel as lousy as we have entering the bye week for the Bills, essentially since the 2019 season. It's a lot of interesting points to look at here. I mean, come on, the Bills have been either 4-2 or 5-1 every single season since 2019. Now, they've only had the bye 2 other times in week 7, I believe, in 2021 and 2022. But the fact is that the Bills have had that kind of 4-2 or 5-1 record, like I've said, every single season. So why are we bothered so much by it this time? Well, of course, that the fact that it occurs prior to the bye week makes it difficult. And there's also the notion of the noise. Now, Sean McDermott is one to profess that he does not listen to any noise coming from national media right down to podcasts like this one. And why? Because it is just a distraction. It is noise by definition, such as he says. But he has admitted that it does get through. And one of the things that certainly got through to the Bills is the notion of reputation and expectation. And by that, I'm talking about the fact that the Bills, of course, before the season started, were favored in every single game this season. And this business of reputation and expectation also reared its head when the Bills hosted the Ravens in Game 1 because the Ravens were touted to be one of the best teams in the league. And of course, the Bills were down 15 points to the Ravens with 4 minutes left in the game, but ended up winning it 41-40. And when we watched that game that night, we kind of felt like, well, the Bills triumphed over this great Ravens team, so maybe the prophecies are correct and the Bills are on their way to being the Super Bowl entrant for the AFC. But then the Ravens started losing and have continued losing. And of course, they've had injuries and so forth. But everybody has injuries. Nobody cares. But the fact is, we had to start wondering whether the 41-40 win by the Bills said more about the Buffalo Bills or said more about the Baltimore Ravens. And then we proceeded through the next few games. The Bills beat the Jets 30-10, had them 30-3 until the very end. So that looked more or less normal. But then in successive games versus the Dolphins and then the Saints, the Bills won those, certainly by 10-plus points, I believe, in both cases. But the fact is that the wins didn't feel that comfortable. And in fact, as we know, it took roughing the punter penalties against both the Dolphins and the Saints to enable the Bills to get ahead in those games. And of course, we can surmise that had those penalties not occurred, the Bills may well have won anyway. But the one thing you have to admit is the Bills were not boat racing teams in this early season portion as they had in previous seasons. And we can recall the games, how badly the Bills beat up on the Commanders or the Dolphins. I think that was 48-20 a few seasons ago after the Dolphins put 70 points on the Broncos. And there have been other big wins. And we really haven't seen the Bills clowning their opponents early in the season, with the exception of the Jets. And of course, the Jets are what they are, as we can see this season. So that gives us a little bit of pause that the Bills perhaps are not as great as the noise before the season started. And this is what we were thinking after 4 games. Yes, they're 4-0, but the notion was they're 4-0, but they haven't played their best football yet. And of course, we're under the impression that they're going to progress and play their best football as we go along. But the 4-2 start now looks very shaky. And I'm talking about the wins look shaky. And what's gone on in some of the losses has been unspeakable. And then the thing that has bothered me a great deal, that many other people have lauded, was the interview done of Josh Allen by ESPN that aired prior to the game last Monday night when the Bills visited Mercedes-Benz Stadium and the Atlanta Falcons. And Josh Allen is heard to be talking in that interview of how his wife has kind of taught him that he's more than a football player, and that about not having expectations, about winning, not being everything, which he should have followed up by saying winning is the only thing. You know, even Vince Lombardi regretted saying that, but I think it's still true. And then he starts making comparisons and talking about Scottie Scheffler, the golfer. I can't even begin to conjure an analogy that properly captures how bad a comparison of the PGA to the NFL is. And furthermore, if you want to talk about Scottie Scheffler, Josh, let's understand that Scottie Scheffler has essentially won the Super Bowl. a number of times in the PGA, and you have not. And I found that interview extremely disturbing. Extremely disturbing. And the fact that it was even aired, and the fact that he would say those things, and say those things in the middle of an NFL season. And I think all of this points to something that I'm going to get to later on in the show. But the 4-2 start, although similar in number to the 4-2 or 5-1 starts even that the Bills have had since 2019, this one feels different, and it feels a little scarier. Let's proceed. Stick with me. Now, during the 4-game winning streak that started the Bills season, we kind of had to say some good things about the offense. We were talking about how Josh Allen looked ever more mature, how it appeared that the game had slowed down even more for him, that the receiving corps seemed to be better than what we had last year, and the fact that James Cook looked every bit worth the contract extension he signed during the preseason to end his hold-in. And those things got reinforced, of course, for example, during the game against the Ravens, where the offense came back miraculously from 15 points down. The defense got some stops against the Ravens. And at that point, it looked great. Since then, we're wondering if that game, like I said earlier in the show, had more to say about the Bills or about the Ravens. But Buffalo has gone through those 4 games looking like they hadn't played their best football yet, but were still winning, which put a very positive spin on how the season was going. But then we got into the previous 2 games. First, the loss to New England, where my comment about the failed handoff, or end around, if you will, to Dawson Knox, which resulted in a fumble recovered by the Patriots, and certainly the Bills got the ball right back in the very next play. But during my postgame show, I called it cute. And I had not yet heard Sean McDermott use the very same term to describe that play. That's obviously what he was talking about in his post-game press conference, because I didn't take that in until after I had completed my show and was nearly shocked to hear that. Then we've had the lack of focus and penalties, all the holding calls that occurred during the game versus the Patriots. And then more penalties, not quite as bad during the game versus the Falcons, but many missed opportunities for the Bills. Touchdown on the first drive of the first half, touchdown on the first drive of the second half, and then 3 and outs following those. Incredibly, we're trying to do another cute play with a misdirection end around to Elijah Moore on a 4th down, taking the ball out of both Josh Allen's hands and James Cook's hands. And of course, to that end, James Cook wasn't even on the football field versus the Falcons for over the last 11 minutes of the football game. And to me, that is offensive, and why I've titled this segment Offensive Offense. And I don't know really what to say about it. I mean, because we could talk about these things. We could talk about what Joe Brady's doing. Maybe he's listening to his own press that he's the next great head coach coming along. Of course, we've heard from some of the McDermott haters that let's get rid of McDermott and hire Joe Brady as our head coach and so forth. But from what I've seen with this offense, it's been extremely offensive, like I said. But these are not the reason the Bills have lost these 2 games. And they're not the reason that the Bills didn't even look great in the first 4 games. They're symptoms. But we'll continue now, and we'll talk about the Bills' defense and what's been going on there. Now, whereas my characterization of the Bills' offense being offensive, I believe, is accurate, using the term indefensible for the defense might be a little bit harsh. I mean, after all, the Bills' defense has held the previous 2 opponents in these losses to 23 and 24 points, respectively. You can point to a lot of things about the defense, including the secondary, which has been a problem. But on the other hand, run stopping, especially on the defensive line end of it, has been decent. But there's talk about gap integrity not being correct and fundamentals not being correct, and especially problems in the second level of the Bills' defense, and certainly with safeties and so forth. Just many, many reasons for why the Bills' defense is failing. And one that really hasn't been mentioned as much just has to do with game script. Because if you've got Josh Allen and Joe Brady hitting on all cylinders and racking up points, you put the defense in better positions than you do when the offense is just scoring 1 touchdown on the opening drive of the game and then the opening drive of the second half, and then meandering through the rest with 3 and outs and fumbles and interceptions and so forth. So from that standpoint, I give the defense even a little bit more praise. But the real malaise that's sitting here over the Bills is really affecting both units, which I've used as the reason to call them offensive and indefensible. And of course, these reasons for losing these games are those that are being bandied about by everyone from national talking heads to Bills podcasts everywhere. In fact, even Joe Marino on Locked On Bills indicated after the game that you could mention any number of things about the 2 losses, and especially about the loss to the Falcons, and you'd be correct, because they're all correct, and there are so many of them. But I think there's something a little bit deeper going on here with the Bills. And we're going to talk about that in the next segment. Stick with me. Every single fan of the Buffalo Bills and every member of the Bills organization itself has certainly been trying to come up with things to explain why this season is going like it is, to explain how the Bills could have lost 2 games in a row in which they were double-digit point favorites. And you can talk about everything from what went on in the actual game, from 3 and outs to interceptions to penalties to missed tackles to missed assignments. Certainly all those are valid. And you can also talk about higher level things, perhaps schemes that are being run, or the fact that players perhaps are aging and not as effective as we thought they might be based on their performance from previous seasons. And you can get yourself lost in talking about all of this and grabbing for this or that, trying to latch onto something to ease your mind as to why this is going on with the Bills. But let's look at a little analogy here. We'll take an accident victim, someone that's been in a car accident. I don't want to make it deeply serious or anything, but someone that's gotten racked up pretty good in a car accident. And they end up in the hospital. And then the question is asked, why are they in the hospital? Well, because they've got a couple of fractured ribs, they've got some lacerations, maybe a broken leg, maybe a compound fracture, maybe some internal injuries, maybe a concussion. And you'd be correct if you answered with those things as to why is this patient in the hospital. But those are symptoms. They're not causes. The reason the patient is in the hospital is because he got into a car wreck. Let's be clear on this. It's because he got into a car wreck. All the things that happened to him as a result of the car wreck are symptoms. And they are symptoms that are being treated while they're in the hospital. But that's not the cause of being in the hospital. The cause is different than the symptoms. And that's exactly what we've got going on here with the Bills, because we could talk about all of these symptoms, everything I've gone over already, everything from poor play to poor drafting to poor coordination to lack of focus to lack of fundamentals, on and on and on and on. They're all symptoms of a larger problem with this team. And that's the small and short point I wanted to make in this segment, because I'm going to tie it all up in the next segment. Stay with me. So for my last segment, I'm now going to get into what I believe is actually going on with the Buffalo Bills. And I'm going to use an example directly from the mouth of Sean McDermott that we watched him relate during Hard Knocks at the end of the summer. And if you don't recall, he was talking about being on his high school football team. They're getting ready for their first game. He and his teammates are all sitting in the locker room. They're thinking about the game, getting themselves up for it, and so forth. And the head coach of the team walks in and without a word picks up a folding chair and throws it through a window. The team is stunned, and then they are fired up, and they went out and won the game going away, I believe he stated. But then McDermott goes on to state that, well, you can't do that every week. And this is all in response to him being asked, well, how do you coach? What do you like to present as a head coach? And he talked about the term steady, of things being steady, of being the same, of being even-keeled. But I have to ask in response to that, when we've been watching games and seeing some of what's been going on and getting upset at this or irate at that, what have we seen Sean McDermott do? Have we ever seen Sean McDermott take his headset and throw it on the sideline, breaking it out of anger? Have we seen him taking a Microsoft Surface and frisbeeing it into the bench? Have we seen him get into the face of a player who has just come off the field having made a dumb mistake? Have we seen him get into a referee's face? Perhaps Sean Hockley from a couple of weeks ago, when the Bills got holding call after holding call, and where one or none was called on the Patriots. When have we seen Sean McDermott do anything on the sideline except clap when the Bills are coming off the field after a failed fourth down attempt, after having run a play that he had to go and characterize as being cute? after the game. This football team, like many football teams, will go out and perform, embodying in their performance what the head coach is. And if McDermott is not getting upset on the sidelines to the extent that we are in watching some of the crap that's gone on with this team, what's he doing behind the scenes? Probably just as he described in the Hard Knocks episode when he was talking about being even-keeled. I would probably have taken Joe Brady by the shirt collar and shaken his ass for the dumb stuff that's being called, for the fact that our running back, who we just signed to an extension, who has really been an engine of this offense, wasn't even on the field for the last 11 minutes of the game versus the Falcons. And even though you would have thought that he would have gotten in Joe Brady's face the week before for having run the cute play, the end around to Dawson Knox. When the hell are we handing the ball off to Dawson Knox, and yet we're doing it, I believe, even on a first down? McDermott brings it up during the press conference using the word cute. And it's funny that I use the same word in my postgame show. I'm sure he didn't watch my postgame to come up with it, but I heard me say it before I heard him say it. And then we heard reporters asking Joe Brady about it the next day, and Brady asked like he hadn't heard it. This team is acting like, it's performing like, it's even interviewing like, in the case of Josh Allen and this daffy ESPN interview where he's comparing things to golf and to Scotty Scheffler. All of it is a representation of what Sean McDermott actually is for this team. We don't see any fire from McDermott on the sideline. How are we expected to see fire from his team? You saw it from Andy Reid. Remember when Travis Kelce Swift came up and was kind of getting in Reid's face a little bit? Reid bumped him. What about the world champion Philadelphia Eagles and Nick Sirianni? Yes, they're having their problems too, but at least he gets animated on the sideline, and at least he's been to Super Bowls with his team. What about Mike Vrabel? Guys, the problem with this team, the cause, not the symptoms, the cause of what's going on is attitude. It's all about attitude. Football is all about attitude. You could talk about difference in talent and schemes and performance and game script and focus and in penalties. How many times do we hear McDermott in these daffy after halftime interviews, like last week, stating that, well, we had an 8-man box, but it's fundamentals. There's no gap integrity. You've been there, 9 years, McDermott? When are you going to teach them these fundamentals you keep on talking about? I'm sure you've taught them over and over again. But Sean McDermott needs to start acting a little more like General George Patton, where he makes his team more afraid of him than they are of the opponent. There needs to be some attitude on this team. This is my podcast, is all about attitude. You can talk about all the reasons and the looking at film and who was open and who wasn't, and schemes that weren't run or were run. I mean, those things are valid, certainly. Joe Brady should have known that the Patriots were vulnerable in their base defense, but every time the Patriots showed base defense, the Bills were running at it rather than throwing, because that's where they're vulnerable. And the Bills knew damn well that the Falcons have been blitzing almost more than any team in the league, have had the fewest pass yards allowed of, I think, any team in the NFL. You knew this going in. But Joe Brady insists on running his stuff because he's under the impression he's so brilliant because he's either the next head coach of the Bills or whomever it might be. Because he's not getting stepped on. If it happens 2 weeks in a row with cute plays, with McDermott even calling it out in the post-game press conference after the Patriots, there is a problem. And it's time for Sean McDermott to start demonstrating an attitude and demonstrating an example for his team. And to stop being the non-chair throwing, even keel coach. They've got a couple of weeks to think about this before they go play the Panthers. And then they're going to host the Chiefs and Andy Reid. It's time for you, Sean McDermott, to stop letting your daddy kick your ass. It's time for you to grow in attitude. And get rid of this even keel bullshit. And start instilling this football team with an aggressive attitude that is designed to crush the opponents and burn their villages. Because I'm getting a little bit tired of seeing the mild-mannered thing that's allowing this crap to persist. Fundamentals not being followed, cute plays being run, and it's gotten so bad that you've got a quarterback questioning the importance of winning. So with that, thank you very much for watching the show. Again, I urge you to go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and you'll get more of these takes. And you'll get them every week as we go along through this season. So thanks again, and until then, be good, do good, God bless, and go Bills. I am the Ralph, and this is the Ralph Rant. Out.